it's been really, really helpful for us. So as Fran mentioned, I'm Nisha Kirk. I'm the Open Government Participation Policy Officer, and I've been working on this procurement process alongside Freya, who's our procurement specialist. We are not joined here today by Amy, our principal researcher. She's enjoying some well-earned annual leave today, but we will aim to take any questions that we get today, and if needs be, we'll take them away and answer as a team and get back to you in writing as well. So we'll aim for this presentation to be hopefully a 30-minute split between presentation and questions and answers. And as noted, as you'll see later in the slides, the question and answer section will be captured and shared afterwards. So that's why it's important that you put questions in the chat bar. It means we can record them and get back to you as well. So for context around the Participation Framework Agreement, it was in late 2023 that the Scottish Government announced its intention to develop a framework agreement, and this is to support our commitment to establishing a person-centred approach across government and to increasing the use of participatory processes. And so we're here today to share more information around the development of the framework, which has seen some changes following internal and external feedback. To gain your views on the development of the framework and also to answer any questions you may have for us. For further context for the external feedback that we've been working with up until now, this was through a request for information survey that was shared through the Public Contracts Scotland page for the framework agreement earlier this year. And that was of suppliers who were registered to the framework opportunity. See if I can move slides. There we go. So this is our agenda for today. So we'll cover a bit of background to the framework agreement, and then we'll move into a bit around about building understanding of the framework agreement to give a bit of context to the rationale, and that will include Freya as well, outlining the procurement process. Then we'll move into questions and answers, and then briefly touch on next steps, or some immediate next steps. So for background, as a government, we are increasingly adopting participatory approaches to involve members of the public in the definition, design and delivery stages of a government decision. And on the left-hand side, there's some kind of clippings or images here kind of trying to show the breadth of that engagement. So more kind of high-profile, larger-scale engagements, such as our Citizens' Assembly, Scotland's Climate Assembly is one example, to kind of smaller-scale engagements, such as citizens' juries or citizens' panels, and also to more embedded forms of participation, such as participatory budgeting. And just so I guess we're all clear, that when we talk about participation, we're describing this as how people get involved in decisions which affect them or are important to them. So the Scottish Government does have a vision for public participation, and that is that people can be involved in decisions that affect them, making Scotland a more inclusive, sustainable and successful place. And there are many policies, strategies, reports, etc. that outline or recommend participation. And this timeline here is a bit of a potted history, and the milestones that we've chosen here have had a cross-government impact and have put into focus the need for more public participation in the work of government. So some notable ones, for example, the Christie Commission in 2011, this stipulated that services must be designed and built through collaboration. Our Open Government Action Plans, a little plug for my own role here. We've had improving public participation as a key theme throughout each of our action plans since 2016. And we also have the In-Service of Scotland. So this is current to, still today, our mission, principles and values that we as civil servants work towards, and that is that we put people we serve at the heart of everything we do. I think probably most relevant to this framework agreement is the establishment of the Children Young People's Framework Agreement. This went live earlier this year, so suppliers have been appointed to that framework, and it's operational. It is operational now. And this was a resource to help officials meet and respond to Article 12 of the UNCRC, and that is the right for young people to have their views heard on matters that affect them, and for those views to be taken seriously. So this is kind of predecessor to the Participation Framework Agreement that we're discussing today. So overall, taking these kind of together, the Scottish Government's commitment to designing person-centred services is a key driver to involve people in the work of government in more frequent and in innovative ways. So we wanted to quickly just touch on why do we think participation is important, and the benefits of taking a participatory approach are recognised across government. And these are just a few, there's many, but we recognise that people are experts in their own lives and solutions need to be embedded in this knowledge. Increasing diversity in the room enhances problem-solving capacity, collective creativity and innovation. Participation can reduce risk and can protect against poor outcomes, ineffective policy, controversy, and can integrate service provision. It can promote support and legitimacy for policy decisions as it allows the public to follow, influence, and also understand the process leading to a decision. And it can enhance public trust in government and democratic institutions by giving people a role in public decision making. However, we would say we recognise these benefits, but we are now at a stage where a more coordinated approach to commissioning participatory work is required for us to better utilise and realise these benefits and outcomes. So this is where the Participation Framework Agreement has kind of been born from. So it will aim to create, as I've said, a coordinated approach to commissioning participatory work with adults at the Scottish Government. And it will look to appoint suppliers who have the skills and expertise to design and deliver high quality and inclusive engagement with a wide range of people, and particularly those identified as being seldom heard and furthest from decision making. And we'll come back to those terms later in the presentation. And it's anticipated that the appointed suppliers will be both organisations operating at a national level and those working within specific communities. And these organisations will engage and represent, as mentioned, a diverse range of people using both digital and in-person participatory approaches. So we thought it would be quite helpful to perhaps touch on a little bit of terminology for those who are maybe perhaps unfamiliar with definitions that we might be using later on in the presentation. So what is a framework agreement or framework, as we've noted here? So it's a pre-agreed list of suppliers who have been assessed and evaluated on their ability to meet the requirements of a framework agreement. And this defines the terms and conditions and the pricing structure. A call-off contract, this might be mentioned later on as well, or is mentioned later on as well. A call-off is the individual piece of work commissioned, which would specify what is required and when. So a contract is created when this has been agreed with a supplier using the terms and conditions of the framework. A framework service provider, so these are organisations appointed to the framework. You may be more familiar with the terms service provider, contractors, suppliers and tenders. The framework manager, so that would be the open government team at Scottish Government. They would oversee the management of the participation framework and will be the main point of contact for kind of monitoring, evaluation and reporting. A lot, so we have chosen for this framework to be divided into lots. So a lot is one of several categories that goods or services can be divided into. And the use of lots allow for multiple providers to be able to be appointed following one procurement process. And in this case, each lot would be made up of organisations with something in common. And using lots allows policy areas to invite organisations from one or multiple lots to apply for contracts. And then finally, a mini competition. A mini competition could also be called a quick quote. Again, you might be more familiar with that terminology. This is where multiple suppliers are invited to submit a tender or bid to deliver a piece of work. And all suppliers on a lot would be invited to do that. And then the winner is based on who offers the best quality and cost. So moving more into building understanding of the framework here, and we want to touch on voices we want to prioritise. So we wanted to touch on intersectionality as part of this presentation, as this was an area raised in external engagement survey results and internally as well. So for the purposes of this framework, we do have different lot categories that separate different groups and communities. However, we do not intend for this to preclude an intersectional approach, which is important for especially participatory engagements. We are encouraging, or would encourage, subcontracting as part of this framework agreement, and this can aid an intersectional approach. And a buyer's guide for staff will be developed, which will include information on intersectionality and will outline that staff should actively consider intersectionality when developing their tender specifications. And again, just to be clear, when we're talking about intersectionality, Scottish Government defines intersectionality as a recognition that people are shaped by their simultaneous membership of multiple interconnected social categories. The interaction between multiple social categories occurs within a context of connected systems and structures of power, such as laws or policies. A recognition of inequality of power is key to intersectionality as well. And finally, structural inequalities reflected as relative disadvantage and privilege are the outcomes of the interaction between social categories, power relations, and contexts. As a result, an individual's experience of inequality can be chronic or transitionary, creating a unique lived experience. So alongside the development of a buyer's guide for staff to support them to procure services through the framework, and intending to include information on intersectionality as part of this throughout, the framework manager as well will also act to reinforce this message and will be a point of contact throughout the drafting of the specification as well. As mentioned earlier, we are very interested for this framework to reach those furthest on decision making and often seldom heard. So what we mean by that is individuals with furthest for decision making, individuals with certain protected characteristics, identities, and/or experiences that impact their access to decision making power. So this impacts a broad range of individuals, including those who are disabled, from minority ethnic backgrounds, from areas of high multiple deprivation, those part of the LGBTQI+ community, girls and young women. And seldom heard refers to underrepresented individuals who are less likely to be heard by professionals and decision makers. So these groups or individuals may need to be treated with particular sensitivity and may be marginalised or dispersed. So seldom heard groups could include mobile populations, vulnerable groups, end of life, and carers and care experienced. However, taking this all into account in the specification, we would use the terms further from decision making seldom heard to describe comparable forms of exclusion. So now move on to the lot categories. So these lot categories have changed from our initial idea of what they would look like. So lot 1, which should occur now, lot 1 recognises the role of organisations with multiple specialisms, so those that engage with a wide range of people. And then lots 2 to 7 recognise organisations that provide bespoke services to identified groups and define communities with key demographics. So as mentioned, these have been revised following internal and external feedback. And we have seen from the sector, from our request for information survey and from work commissioned and carried out by Scottish Government, there seems to be merit to dividing work into lots with a focus on certain communities with key demographics. And just to sort of, support with the understanding about lot 1, this would focus on the use of representative sampling, so a larger scale method to carry out inclusive engagement at a general population level. So lot 2, this moves into our more bespoke kind of lotting structure or category. This would be organisations that would work with individuals in matters related to race, ethnicity and anti-racism. Lot 3 would be organisations that work with individuals with a disability or impairment. Lot 4, organisations that work with individuals on matters related to health and social care. Lot 5, organisations that would work with individuals on matters related to gender and the LGBTQI+ community. Lot 6 would be organisations engaging with individuals on matters related to climate change. And finally, lot 7, organisations that work to engage individuals on matters related to justice and social welfare. We want to caveat here that these are not set in stone. We are open to discussing these and changing where required, and lot configuration is an area we're keen to gain feedback on, and we'll come back to this at the end of the Q&A, but this is, as it currently stands, what we're currently working towards. So, intended outcomes for the framework agreement. So, we are interested for this to have defined outcomes for what it wants to achieve. And as part of this, organisations that would end up as suppliers on the framework will have demonstrated understanding, expertise and evidence of quality if they are to be appointed to the framework. We will operate, or we intend to operate with a mini competition approach, as this can encourage innovation and creativity. Tailored approaches based on target groups' needs and preferences, the way that the framework is being structured would best support this. And suppliers would have established relationships and will be able to create environments conducive to inclusive participation that ensures the safety and well-being of participants. We're hoping the framework will support officials to move towards impactful types of participation, such as involving and collaborating. And we hope it will remove previous barriers between theory and practice, both inside and outside government as well. And the framework process will recognise supplier buyer expertise and will support collaboration to improve the delivery of participatory engagements. And a key outcome for us internally is the support of the framework to develop an evidence bank for staff. So work commissioned through the framework will be captured to reduce duplication of engagement. And on the right-hand side, we have our spectrum of participation, which is what our guidance, the main guidance for Scottish Government staff includes. So you might be familiar that we often consult as a government, but we are keen to move through the framework agreement, keen to move engagements towards the more involving, collaborating side of that spectrum. So I'll pass on to Freya now, who will take you through some procurement processes as part of the framework.
Thanks, Deisha. Yeah, so in this slide, I'll talk through what happens at the call-off level, and this would be once the framework's up and running. So to begin with, the Scottish Government buyer will contact suppliers by email, and that will just be with a couple of paragraphs to give them an idea of what they're hoping to procure. And this is to give suppliers some advance notice, get an idea of what's coming and gauge capacity. The buyer will finalise their tender documents and then use the quick quote facility on Public Contract Scotland, inviting all the suppliers on the lot. And then we'll recommend a minimum of 2 weeks, more if possible, but technically it could be shorter than this, but 2 weeks or more is our recommendation. Suppliers won't need to fill out their single procurement document at the SPD because they'll have already done that at framework level. The supplier will provide proposals for the piece of work and pricing, which lines up with the framework pricing structures. The responses will be evaluated, and the buyer will issue letters to notify suppliers of the outcome, and then that will get recorded on PCS on the notices page. On the next slide, I'll talk through the procurement process to become a framework supplier, and just some of the key information that you might want to know. So with frameworks, they can only be for a maximum of 4 years. So and that would include extension options. So it would probably be 2 years initially, and then extend it for like 1 year and then 1 year. We'll use the single stage open procedure, and the contract notice will be advertised via Public Contract Scotland, and then that links up behind the scenes with Find a Tender service. In order to access the documentation, we'll be using the PCS tender service, which links up with PCS. And when that's live, all the documents will be available on PCST, and that's where you'll submit your bid. SMEs, registered charities, NGOs, supported businesses can bid individually with subcontractors or as part of a consortium, and we'd really welcome organisations getting together and considering putting in either a joint bid or a bid with subcontracting. Just to give you an idea of the timescales we're working to, we're hoping to finalise the documentation next and issue the contract notice in the autumn, and then we're hoping to award in spring next year. And the evaluation criteria will likely have a 70-30 split, so 70% quality, 30% price. That bit might change depending, I mean, everything here today, it could still change before we actually publish, because we're still developing all the ideas. And if we could go on to the next slide, that will show some of the key steps. Yeah. So we, as I said, we're currently in like this first stage, which is the prior information notice and supplier engagement. We'll then finalise all our documents and issue the contract notice. Then it will be out to tender. And then where the evaluation period, that can really depend based on how many bids we receive, how long that will take. Then we'll notify suppliers of the outcome and enter a standstill period. And then the contract will, well, like the framework will get awarded, and then there'll be a mobilization period to help suppliers which have been added to the framework to start planning, and then there'll be the actual contract start date, and that will be from when you can start receiving call-off contracts. Okay, if you go to the next slide. I think this has been touched on already, but the single procurement document, and this is part of the selection stage. The single procurement document, which we refer to as the SPD, it's a set of standardized questions, and it's built into the PCST portal. So it might be that if you are a registered supplier on PCST, you might have already answered this before. And this will cover your basic company information, information on criminal convictions, and then the part of the SPD which we can change will be that we will set minimum insurance levels, and we'll set economic and financial standing requirements, and it's likely this would be via financial ratios. And we may also include a section where you would describe your previous experience. We also ask that when a tenderer puts in their bid, that there's separate SPDs for any known subcontractors who will be involved in the service. And then also, as part of our mandatory requirements, we'd ask all tenderers to commit to paying the real living wage in the delivery of this, any work related to the framework, and pay subcontractors within 30 days. And there's a question in the SPD about providing a plan relating to the climate emergency. Go to the next slide. Okay. And this slide's intended just to give you an idea of what to expect in the invitation to tender documents. So there'll be instructions, and these can change between every procurement, so it's always worth giving them a read. There'll be a number of schedules. Some of the key ones will be the specification, and that will be detailing the exact requirements we have for each lot, like in order to be a framework supplier. So these could be quite generalized, but and then we'll also have reporting requirements, and that will include things like what key performance indicators we'll use, and that's a way to measure performance within, like as the contract goes on. we'll ask you to include improved subcontractors, and we'll also have schedules about data protection and cybersecurity requirements. And then with the award criteria and evaluation, that's the bit where you'll provide your responses to what we've outlined. So the technical questions, they'll vary between different lots and they'll relate to that specification. And then we'll also ask some Scottish Government policy questions. So these will be around fair work, the climate emergency, and community benefits. And the idea with the evaluation and award criteria at framework level is that by asking some of the questions at the start, we'd hope that then lots of these won't need to get repeated. For example, you won't need to put in a fair work response every time, or your cybersecurity credentials. So then it means that when there's a quick quote, we can focus on what's actually being asked for that specific piece of work. You'll also provide a pricing schedule. This will probably be quite light at the framework level. It will be probably more to do with framework day rates for staff. And then the invitation to tender will also include the Scottish Government terms and conditions and rules for using the framework. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, we've pulled together some questions that you might have about the framework. Sorry, the slide's a little bit dense. So the first one is, who will be able to use the participation framework? And this framework will just be for Scottish Government use. And there might be some departments that relate to like the core Scottish Government who'd also be able to use it too, but it won't be for the wider Scottish public sector. It won't be mandatory to use the framework within the Scottish Government, but we would strongly encourage its use. And what are the kind of reporting requirements that a supplier might have that's on the framework? So we would require suppliers to meet regularly with the open government team who will be managing the contract, complete and submit progress and outcome reports. This will include reporting on KPIs and participate in an annual evaluation of the framework to support the Scottish Government and to help us improve. Can suppliers be added to the framework? I think I might have already seen a question about this, but once the framework is awarded, suppliers won't be added after that point. So that's one of the ways that a framework differs from DPS, a dynamic purchasing system. On a DPS they can be added, but in this case it will be suppliers will submit their bids at the beginning, and then once they get a place on the framework, they're the suppliers for the full duration. Will the framework affect current grant agreements in place which have been awarded by Scottish Government? So no, grants won't be affected. It will be down to Scottish Government business areas and ministers to decide if work will be covered by a grant or if a procurement is more appropriate. But for any grants in place, that we don't see that would change as a result of this framework. Will there be a guide to support people using the framework? I think we've already touched on that we will develop a buyer's guide, and that'll offer guidance to Scottish Government staff looking to commission work through the procurement, and it'll also offer guidance about things like how long to advertise call-offs. What support is there for SMEs? So we would really strongly encourage getting in touch with the supplier development program, and keeping an eye on the events page, because they offer some really good events about getting using different systems and getting ready to tender for opportunities. Some other ways is that we also have some flexibility in our timescale, so we can, when this goes out to market, we can have it out to market for a longer tender period, and we would aim to avoid as much duplication as we can when to make call-offs easier. So going through a lot of the key questions at the beginning, so you're not having to repeat yourself later on. And can you partner with another organization? So yes, we've got a Microsoft Forms link. Look, we're going to send around, and through this link we'll ask some questions, but also you can register your interest as a potential subcontractor on the framework, and then this list will be shared with other suppliers who might be looking for subcontractors, or the list could also be used for organisations that might be looking to bid as a consortium. This can be quite a good way for smaller organisations to get involved if they don't want to bid individually, or they might be missing some criterias. So I'll hand you over to Nisha to talk about the next steps.
Great, thanks, Freya. Yeah, so just quickly, some next steps. As Freya outlined, it's estimated that the framework will be awarded in spring 2025, but this will depend on a number of factors. So depending on the feedback we receive from external engagement sessions such as today, on the number of suppliers who choose to bid to the framework, we currently have over 100 following the PIN at present, and then in turn that will also impact on the time needed to then evaluate these bids to each of the lots. This is again just another plea to make sure you're registered to the prior information notice on Public Contracts Scotland for this opportunity. This is the main way to receive information about the framework, and importantly when the invitation to tender goes live as well. Also to register as a supplier on PCST, as this will be where all the, as we mentioned, the invitation to tender, ITT, documents get published. And then, yes, finally, as Freya mentioned, complete our survey on MS Teams, an MS Teams form, to provide your feedback about this procurement process. So this includes, detailing your information if you'd like to be, if you're interested in being a subcontractor. And we also have some questions as well for yourselves following this session. Go, final session. So let's go back for a minute. So we're on to the Q&A part of this session now. So yes, this is an opportunity to ask us any questions you may have. And as we mentioned, these will be captured and expanded on in writing and shared following the session. Again, just a bit of a caveat, and to be mindful that this framework agreement is still under development. So we'll answer questions as fully as possible as we can during the session. We are one person down as well. But if we don't have the answer, then we will follow up in writing. And yeah, again, about the MS Teams form, if any questions. So this also is a way for you to ask any of the questions that you may have following today's session. I know it's sometimes difficult to maybe formalize your question on a call like this. So that is an opportunity for you to follow up with us after that. And I think just very quickly, this is just a bit of information about the framework ambition when thinking about questions for us. This is what we're kind of aiming to achieve. So I guess I'll hand back to Fran maybe, and should I stop sharing my screen? Would that be helpful?
Perfect, yes, that would be great. Let me just stop the recording there.